topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Well, hello and welcome. Bill Martinez here. Great to have you with us, sharing a part of your day. For more info on the show, you can go to billmartinezlive.com. Well, our First Amendment of our Constitution has no doubt been in the crosshairs of many liberals, and it's been rather frustrating. But hey, just for the record here, let me remind you what it says in our Constitution. It says Congress may not make any law that sets up any religion or interferes with any religious practice. Congress may not make any law that diminishes the freedom of speech or the freedom of the press or the right of the people to assemble peacefully or the right of the people to petition the government to make things right if it has caused them harm. That is the First Amendment in its totality. And we're going to focus particularly on free speech as a core American value. And there is a reason, I believe, paramount, in why our founders focused so much on free speech and made it. I mean, of the first 10 amendments to our Constitution, this was the first one. And I believe, not only from practical experience, the founders were motivated to make sure that free speech was headlined, but also, when you think about its broad implication in terms of intellectualizing the electorate, I believe any limit of free speech dumbs us all down. And though you may argue that sometimes free speech can be harsh speech, I understand that. I think that free speech should come with a responsibility. And I think that is something that we still try to debate and work out in our culture even to this day. But no doubt that particularly under the Biden administration, free speech was attacked on many levels. Kenin Spivak is going to be joining us. He is the founder and chairman of the SMI Group, an international consulting firm, and a contributor to RealClearPolitics and Claremont Institute's The American Mind. Kenin, welcome to the show. Good to have you with us.
Well, thanks for having me back.
Well, let's talk about free speech. As you write, a core American value. How do you see it?
I see it as the basis of all our liberties. And if you don't mind, I want to add to what you did when you read the First Amendment. Mm-hmm. The First Amendment says Congress shall make no law abridging, and then it goes on from there. Mm-hmm. Well, everyone needs to understand that the United States Supreme Court has repeatedly held that though the words are Congress shall make no law, that the First Amendment applies equally to the executive branch of the federal government in its actions and to the actions of the state governments and municipalities. So the First Amendment is really much broader than can be seen by just reading the plain words, Congress shall make no law. And the reason the Supreme Court expanded the application of the First Amendment first to the executive branch and then to the states and municipalities is because it recognized that that was the intention, that was the meaning given to those words when they were first written so many years ago. Without the First Amendment, we are no better than that which government decides we can talk about. And that really is what was happening during the Biden administration. The suppression of free speech, particularly on social media, but not only on social media, wasn't just directed to COVID. Bill, so many people talk about what the Biden administration did as limiting dissenting views on COVID, and it did. But the Biden administration also suppressed dissenting views on many issues, on the economy, on international trade, even humor directed at the Biden administration. That's something we can never again allow to happen, but I'm not so sure we're ready to stop it from happening again.
No, I appreciate that. And actually, you could actually go before the Trump administration, and this began to raise its ugly head during the Obama years, did it not?
It did. It started during the last year of the Obama administration. It actually continued below the radar during the Trump administration within the deep state.
Mhm.
The last year or two of the Obama administration, a number of agencies were created or reconstituted within particularly the Department of Homeland Security, to a lesser degree in the Department of Justice.
Mhm.
Those agencies or those bureaus within the Department of Homeland Security, and by the way, one even in the Department of State, began to abuse the authority conferred on them to prevent problems with cybersecurity, problems with foreign governments intruding into US cyberspace. And they began to use their authority to limit the rights of American citizens to speak their minds in the cyber arena. During the Trump administration, and this really does show why, or one of the reasons why, in the second Trump administration, he has been so intent on ensuring that he controls not just the department heads, but deeper down into those departments.
Mhm.
Because during the first Trump administration, these same agencies continued to try to control US citizen speech, most especially on social media platforms, but to a lesser degree in other forms of media as well.
Well, I go back with the Obama administration with what he did to the Tea Parties, for example. This was a wink and a nod to Lois Lerner, and he
Mhm.
directed, in a sense, you might say subtly, if not directly, to do something about the Tea Party. And he squelched them in response to some midterm, ambitions. And he saw what was happening with the Tea Parties. They were gaining so much momentum. And so he made sure the
Mhm.
IRS did not give them, tax exemption status that they had requested, which, was routinely given before. It wasn't even a problem. In fact, even Obama's half brother was, I think he got tax exemption, within 6 months, and which was ahead of schedule. And,
Mhm.
just some shenanigans that went on. But the net result, Ken, is that uh, even to this day, this has affected free and fair elections because it really reduced the effectiveness of the Tea Party efforts. And I maintain it's probably been 8 or 9 voting cycles that were affected as a result of that.
You're completely right. And let's just remind your audience, Lois Lerner was a mid-level executive within the Internal Revenue Service.
Mhm.
And not only the Tea Party, but more broadly, she had an animus toward conservative organizations. There are basically two types of tax-exempt organizations. The one that people sometimes even know the number for is called a 501c3. And
Right.
that's an organization to which donations are tax deductible and the organization doesn't pay taxes. There are other type of tax exempt organizations, particularly those involved in politics, that may not pay taxes, but donations are not tax deductible. Lois
Mhm.
Lerner went after 501c3 organizations that she thought were waiting too close to the political organization status on the right. She never did that for organizations on the left. And the
Exactly.
result of what she did was to delay, deny, and even revoke 501c3 tax status to a lot of social organizations and some religious organizations. that had viewpoints she found anathema to her far left perspective. It was used to diminish the effectiveness of the Tea Party, and more broadly, it was used to diminish the fundraising capability of a lot of social organizations and organizations of faith that
Exactly.
weren't far enough left for Lois Lerner. Lois Lerner ultimately was called before Congress to testify. After giving a little bit of a speech for her position, she then claimed the Fifth Amendment right not to incriminate herself. Now, those of us who went to law school, I went to law school, know that if you choose to speak at all in a forum, you've waived your Fifth Amendment right not to continue to speak. But she was allowed this oddity of speaking when she wanted to speak and claiming the Fifth Amendment when she didn't want to speak, got off without any consequence for her horrific actions, did a lot of damage to a lot of conservative organizations and organizations of faith. And Bill, I think you're right, in the Obama administration, really energized this movement to limit the free speech of conservatives and more broadly, people of faith.
Right. And the thing is that it was all in a sense, kind of like a bit of a groundbreaker because they got away with it. And Lois Lerner, of course, retired with a golden parachute, no consequence whatsoever. She's living happily ever after. And of course, probably the statute of limitations has passed. So she is not going to be held liable. And all we can do at this point is just remind everybody that this is what she specifically did. And you mentioned, the deep state that was in operation under the first Trump administration. From what I understand, about 4,000 operatives that were in the Obama administration before completing his term. Obama reassigned them into government employment. So he kind of, in a sense, sent in this battalion of moles into the government operation, the government bureaucracy, to serve as a safety net, so to speak, against what he perceived as radical Trump policies.
Yeah, I don't know the number, and you may well be right, but I do know that in the Biden administration, more than 80 federal agencies and many hundreds of senior federal officers participated in the censorship enterprise during that administration.
Right.
A federal district court judge issued an injunction to stop that activity, found it reprehensible and indefensible. His injunction was largely upheld by the appeals court, but the US Supreme Court then reversed and took the position that the plaintiffs, the state of Missouri, and a lot of private players hadn't demonstrated that the Biden administration was in fact stopping free speech, and that it wasn't possible that the social media companies wouldn't have done it on their own, even without the federal government intrusion. That was a sad day for conservatives. Justice Barrett, I don't think, acquitted herself well in that decision. I don't think her factual analysis was correct. I don't think her legal analysis was correct. But the fact of the matter is, we have a system. I can't pick and choose which Supreme Court decisions I like in the sense of which should be enforced. So exactly. I recognize her right and the right of the majority on that court to make the decision they made. I just wish they had not done so.
Well, how embarrassed they must be now when you have Mark Zuckerberg coming out and saying, hey, they made me do it. And you have Google saying the same thing. X was under pressure before it had known as Twitter, before Elon Musk bought them. And Elon Musk, I think, single-handedly did more for free speech than any other person in modern history in purchasing Twitter, because when he did that, suddenly it opened up the door for free speech once again. Number one, it was refreshing. and we could kind of breathe again for a moment. But then afterwards, Kenan, we get these reports, from from Zuckerberg and Google and these other platforms saying, the FBI was visiting them. Well, come on, give me a break. At that point, that really makes the argument that Justice Barrett put forth even worse yet.
Yeah, Elon Musk did us all a great service when, together with Matt Taibbi on Substack and Barry Weiss, he allowed them to publish proof of what the government had done with X, or Twitter, then Twitter, in suppressing free speech. Look, the facts are what the plaintiffs alleged that they were. It's possible that these left-leaning social media might have suppressed some of the speech even without Biden administration pressure, but there's no doubt that the coercion, the pressure, remember Joe Biden and then Press Secretary Jen Psaki publicly said that the social media were killing people, talking about the COVID side of this, and that action had to be taken, and that the social media had to take action. When the President of the United States and his press secretary threatened to take action if you don't, it's difficult not to see coercion. And there was coercion, and Justice Barrett and a conservative majority that went along with her, or some of the conservatives that went along with her, Justice Kavanaugh in particular, they were wrong.
Right.
The plaintiffs were right, and we all paid the price for it.
Yeah, I mean, who killed who? Kenan, I got to tell you, I spent more time in YouTube jail because we had experts on, medical professionals, reporting from frontline experience what was going on with COVID. And it was, deemed to be an offense to the social media community. And here it is. I mean, our motivation, our heart was, hey, we're being dumbed down here. We're not getting all the information, whether it had to do with the vaccine or, all the procedures and everything that were being thrust upon us by Dr. Fauci and the WHO. And, and here it was, they were doing this all on a basis of an executive authorization use. And then the basis of an EAU is first of all, there can't be another. In order to execute and deem a EAU, you have to make sure that there's not another product available to people that would be able to trigger an EAU. And there was, by evidence and by reports of these experts, there was products on the shelf that could be used to deal with this problem. And of course, we know that now today, with little argument, these doctors have proven themselves. But many of these docs as well, Ken, and they were subject to all kinds of threat of losing their license. And I know of 2 docs down in Imperial Valley in California. They had to go before the tribunal, the Star Chamber in California, and answer. And they wrote a book that they treated over 10,000 patients. Nobody went on a ventilator. Nobody went to a hospital. Not one died. 10,000.
All right. So let me make 2 points. One, California passed a rule that doctors were not permitted, under threat of loss of license, to give any advice or discuss with their patients any positioning consistent with the Fauci position on COVID vaccines. Second, I think that really, as a First Amendment absolutist, which I am, I really want to take a step back, because whether a listener 100% agreed with what Dr. Fauci and some other physicians, or many other physicians, were saying about vaccines and alternative treatments, agreed with none of it, or was somewhere in the middle, I don't think that point of view makes any difference at all to how wrong the Biden administration was, let alone the state of California, in suppressing people's rights to have and discuss other views. Governor Ron DeSantis hosted a forum at which doctors were discussing a range of views on COVID. That was censored, that was taken off of YouTube. There are examples of other leading physicians, including some who are now in the Department of Health and Human Services in very senior positions, who wrote op-eds or who issued tweets or who discussed sometimes even just marginally different views than the doctrine approved by Dr. Fauci. And because of Biden administration suppression, those views were taken down. I don't care if they were right. I don't care if they were wrong. I don't care if I agree or disagree with them. In America, we are supposed to be a country based on the First Amendment and based on the right of free speech. Justice Louis Brandeis said in the 1920s, and many justices of the US Supreme Court since then have made the point, that the antidote or the remedy for speech with which we do not agree, even speech which may turn out to be factually incorrect, is more speech.
Exactly.
More facts, more discussion. So, Bill, you and I have discussed COVID in the past, and I know that you and I don't hold identical views on what would have been the best remedies for COVID. But we hold the identical view on the right of people of all views regarding the best remedies for COVID being able to have their say and not be penalized for having their say. But that's not what happened. And there's no way of making what happened be right or be constitutional.
Exactly. Well, and look what happened. 1.2 million people, 1.4 million people died here in America. Could any of those been saved as a result? I mean, New York was, they're running around with their hair on fire, and Governor Cuomo is taking advisement, from the administration. At the time was the Trump administration, and which was Dr. Fauci and Deborah Birx were leading the cause here. And somehow he comes up with the conclusion to take people who already are susceptible and stack them in a nursing home, which exacerbated the death of some 15,000 American citizens. And,
Right.
nobody wants to talk about that, because whenever you bring it up, especially some of these officials, including former Governor Cuomo, they just kind of hang their heads without, admitting, look, we were in error. What did we learn, from this experience? And what it seems that we're learning is not anything from a policy viewpoint, where government is coming in and saying and reaffirming. What we're learning is from conversations like you are having, like this, like you and I are having like this right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, government officials, like anyone else, read the newspaper, read social media. If opposing views are suppressed, if doctors are prevented from discussing opposing views, then they're not going to learn anything. You don't learn anything by being given only one perspective.
Exactly.
Let me give you two examples of things we now know, without question, were false, but were suppressed and censored by the Biden administration. One, we know that for young children, the risk of the COVID vaccine at least approximated any benefit from the COVID vaccine. Some would say the risk was higher, some would say the risk was a little bit lower, but clearly the COVID vaccine was not an obvious remedy for children to prevent COVID because of the side effects, and because, and this was equally important, children who contracted COVID seldom had any particularly bad symptoms of the COVID. Second thing we know is that it's now universally believed as being likely. I won't go so far as to say universally believed as being certain, but universally believed as being likely that the COVID vaccine originated at the Wuhan facility in China.
Exactly.
Saying that was banned during most of the Biden administration. and banned not because they said just it was false, but it was Chinese bashing. And we've spent a bunch of time here on COVID, but today in 2025, where COVID is becoming a thing of the past, we see far more problems with free speech over purportedly bashing marginalized minorities, not being supportive of minorities. We're seeing a lot of people on the left, and particularly young people on the left, have the view that free speech means you're free to say whatever you want to say that I agree with, or maybe some things I don't completely agree with, but you certainly can't say anything that might not be nice about minorities or trans people or gay people or fat people or anyone who I think needs protection. And the situation with COVID had similarities to what we're seeing today. But what we're seeing today is a banning of free speech, a use of violence to prevent free speech on campus that's even broader than what we saw during the Biden COVID era.
Exactly. Well, and the thing is, as I mentioned in the introduction, Kenin, is that it really dumbs down the populace, and in the process of doing that, it frustrates, it makes us angry. We forget about what it is to reason with one another, as you'd mentioned early on, that we should be able to have these discussions with one another, because I believe that each of us brings a unique perspective, to the debate, which can enhance the conversation and the policy in its final practice. But when everything is an offense because you're speaking the truth. I mean, look what happened here recently, with Charlie Kirk. He's bringing the truth as he understands and he's passionate about. He brings it to these universities that have become, these universities, you think of all places, should be the should be the vanguard of search for truth and open speech. And now it's become so weaponized and angry that they killed Charlie Kirk.
Right. So 2 points. One, on Friday, and you mentioned it, I had an article in American Mind, which is the Claremont Institute publication, and it focused on the results of the FIRE survey of college campuses. So FIRE is the foundation, they changed their name, but I think it's now the Foundation for Individual Rights. And it looks at college campus First Amendment issues. It just recently completed a survey of 68,510 students at about 260 different campuses. Its top 10 schools still scored only in the C range on their scale. Their number one school, Claremont McKenna, was a B minus, but they made the point that's only because they rounded certain scores up, or it would have been a C plus. How horrible that the top 10 schools are only a C, and most of the schools got an F. And that's because college campuses have become anathema to the notion of free speech. And I think it's worth looking at the FIRE report or looking at my article in American Mind, which summarizes the FIRE report and some other polling, to look at how far away we've gotten from free speech on college campuses. A majority of liberals supported the use of violence to prevent speakers from talking about a number of issues that were polled and taking conservative views. But I've got to tell you, a majority of conservative students, much smaller majorities, but still a majority, in one case, 51%, opposed allowing speakers from the left to talk about issues that they found anathema to their conservative perspective. And Bill, let me put this in perspective for a second. In broader polling over the last year or two that isn't focused on Gen Z, roughly 25% of far left people believe that violence can be justified to stop people from talking about far right, or not just far right, conservative issues.
Exactly.
A much smaller percent of conservatives have the same view, 5, 6, 7% at most. But among Gen Z, you had as much as a majority in this FIRE survey. It is very troubling that Gen Z conservatives who've gone to school, indoctrinated by these far left teachers from the American Federation of Teachers and the National Education Association, who believe in all these far left dogma. They may grow up having conservative perspectives, but it seems that they're having them altered. It's as if the DNA has been altered by their far left teachers, and they're really messed up. They're losing conservative perspective. So I am very happy that adult conservatives understand that people are allowed to say things that they, the conservatives, disagree with. I'm not so happy about what's happening in Gen Z. And let me just make one related point. So I am a strong supporter. I've written extensively in support of what the Israeli administration has done to counter the horrible Hamas attack 2 years ago on October 7th, when Hamas broke across the lines in the Gaza Strip and killed and took hostage Israeli civilians. And I support the Netanyahu government's efforts to end Hamas rule in the Gaza Strip. I recognize that a lot of Americans disagree with me. I think they're wrong. I think they have a right to disagree with me. I think they have a right to speak out. I don't think they have a right on college campuses to bar Jewish students or to do violence to Jewish students, but I do think they have a right to peacefully demonstrate on college campuses or off college campuses. I don't think people who have pro-Palestinian views, just views, I'm not talking about material support for terrorists, but views, should be barred from the United States. And I do think the Trump administration risks going too far in prohibiting or requiring universities to prohibit those with these pro-Palestinian views from being able to have their say. And that's because I believe in the First Amendment. I believe the remedy to Palestinian speech with which I disagree is to allow those who disagree to have their say. And the reason I'm making this point is whether it's COVID, where you and I may have somewhat different views, whether it's Palestinians, where I don't think you and I have different views, but a lot of Americans and I have different views. People should be able to speak about things where I think they're completely wrong. That's what the First Amendment is all about. And if we don't get back to that meaning of the First Amendment, we are putting at risk the entire American experiment.
I agree with you. This is all under threat, but there needs to be, I guess, rules of engagement. We need to be reminded of civility, that there's a way in which to disagree. But when you have polling like what you referred to, and I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, two of the people on the top of that list, the assassination list, that too many people think about. I mean, look at the damage that was done to America with 19 hijackers, 19 terrorists. I mean, we're talking, I don't know, potentially millions of young kids here who have been indoctrinated that think it's okay to kill the president of the United States or Elon Musk.
Right. You're referring to, and I actually am looking at it here, it's the National Contagion Research Institute at Rutgers University study. And at risk of emulating Mark Levin, I'll hold the papers in my hand. Okay. 50.2% of those who self-identify as left of center think that there is justification for murder of Elon Musk. 14% of those who identify themselves as right of center hold the same view. Now, that's a very big difference, but 14% is 14% too many. 56% of those who identify as left of center favor or believe there's justification to murder Donald Trump, believe it or not, 20% of those who identify as right of center hold the same view. One last number from that same study. 59.6% of those who identify as left of center believe that there is justification to destroy Tesla dealerships in protest, and 23.6% of those who are right of center. Now, property violence is not murder, but property violence also, in my mind, cannot be justified as a means of advancing the political dialogue. And when you said that there's right ways and wrong ways to articulate your disagreement, yes, but I'm going to say that even when articulated the wrong way, articulated with hate speech, articulated with, as Spangenberger just did, as a call to let your rage flow, I still support the First Amendment right of people to speak out in ways that are really inappropriate, unkind, uncalled for. What I don't support is property violence. I don't support when protests, 7% of the BLM protests in the summer of 2020 turned violent. Mm-hmm. That included arson, looting, and physical altercations that didn't necessarily result in killing anyone. But those are not okay. Some of my friends on the left and some of my centrist friends keep pointing to data that Cato Institute and other research organizations have published that show that over the last 30 years, there have been more political assassinations that were ideologically motivated by people on the right, and there have been more total deaths caused by people on the right, and that's largely, but not only, because of the Oklahoma City bombing that killed 168 Americans. Some of those statistics, I think, are somewhat questionable. I think there's something of a bias in treating non-ideological violence as ideological. Mm-hmm. But I do think it's clear that people on the right over the last 30 years for ideological purposes have killed more than people on the left. And I think those centrists and those people on the left who point to those statistics are correct or correct enough, and that there's too much violence from the right.
I'm not sure I agree with that, Kenin.
Okay.
But that's okay. But the fact of the matter is we got people killing people here, and one is unacceptable. I don't care if you're the right or you're in the left, and you have to do a dive and drill down in terms of what's the genesis of all this. What is promoting all this? You mentioned, these radical professors, these very liberal professors that are indoctrinating our kids. You look at, the way speech is being conducted in these social media platforms. You look at what is contributing to these thought processes, these video games and all this. I mean, I think you can take a look and consider all these things in terms of what's contributing to this anger and this acceptability that undermines, the Constitution. Because, I always say when things are awry, you got to go back to the beginning. Yeah. And I think that we need to revisit what it was the start of this country. What was this great American idea about? And yes, we started in a revolution, and we started to what? I mean, the goal of the revolution is for us to be free. And anything that is done or said, does it add or take away from those freedom principles? And I don't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat. In fact, I really don't care much for the party system. I agree with our first president of the United States, George Washington, who said that parties are going to be a problem. And they have been. They have served to disunify, not unify the United States of America. And here we are today. And we're probably, I don't know, every time it gets so bad, it's always the worst it's ever been, right? So I don't want to kind of fall into that trap. But regardless, we've got a lot of trouble here in River City.
Yeah, we do. So let's put aside the one set of statistics where we might disagree in that, having looked carefully at, in particular, I have that here too, the report of the Criminology, Criminal Justice Law and Society, which did the study through 2020, and Cato did a study from 2020 to today, and Cato's a libertarian organization. Again, I'm fairly well convinced, it doesn't make me right, but fairly well convinced that over that 30-year period, talking just about targeted assassinations, that there were more from the right than the left. But whether I'm right or whether I'm wrong, it is crystal clear to me that in the total volume of violence, the left is far and away the leader, because the left see political activities they don't like and they react with violence. They react with looting and arson and physical altercation, something the right doesn't do except to a limited degree when counter demonstrators show up at large demonstrations called by the left. So they're not totally uninvolved, but they're much less involved, and seldom do they start it. So you have to look at what is violence. Those studies, the one I just held up, the Cato study, they're very limited to fatalities caused by targeted ideological violence. And where they may be wrong is in trying to determine what was the cause of the violence. Mm-hmm. I do think that's too narrow a way to look at violence. I think we have to look at all forms of violence. And when we look at all forms of violence, there's just really no doubt that the left, particularly in the last 5 years, and maybe it doesn't much matter what happened 25 or 30 years ago, except to historians. But as we try to remedy what's happening today, there's no doubt of two things in my mind, or three things. One, that violence writ large, so again, I'm not limiting it to just Charlie Kirk type assassinations, right, but that violence writ large is overwhelmingly a problem from the left. Second, the polls are unambiguous. People on the left support the use of violence at a level far ahead of people on the right. Now, it's bad when it's supported by people on the right or left, but the problem is much larger today on the left. Again, I don't care about 25 years ago, except for historians. Third, there's little doubt that mainstream Democrats and mainstream progressives either encourage or at least excuse violence when they see it, citing the same reason people do in polls. And here's the last point that's very clear in the last couple of years, maybe not much longer than that. People on the left mask violence when it's caused by people on the left. And that's not just ideological violence. When a murderer, not an ideological murder, just a murderer, is a Christian white male, normally the story will point out that the murderer was at least a white male and perhaps a Christian white male. When the murderer is trans or the murderer is a racial minority, the mainstream media will generally just say there was a murder. They won't make a point of the murderer. Now, those murders are not ideological, and the murderer almost certainly didn't do the murder because they were black or white. But part of obscuring what's happening is obscuring the details of the murderer when they're in one group and trumpeting the details of the murder when they're in another.
Exactly.
Or very recently, for ideological murders, lying. Jimmy Kimmel, who from my First Amendment point of view had a right to lie, but lied and said that Charlie Kirk's assassin was a MAGA Republican. He wasn't. He came from a Republican family, and he in the last few years had become a radical leftist, particularly on trans issues. We saw that with other recent ideological attacks. There have been stories that the man just convicted of attempting to assassinate Donald Trump was from the right. There were stories that the attempted assassin of Donald Trump in Pennsylvania was from the right, again, because his family was conservative. You know what? We're not our parents. We're not our grandparents. And when the assassin evolves or changes or mutates into a leftist, he or she is a leftist, and it really doesn't matter what his parents are or were. And yet at the left, they lie about it. So why am I going on about this? I'm going on about this because I think narrow statistics about fatalities over a 30-year period might show one thing. Broader statistics and broader analysis and a more contemporary analysis clearly shows momentum is from the left. We've got to do something about that. The left has got to do something about healing itself, recognizing its problems. If it doesn't recognize this problem, if it doesn't recognize its role in this problem, we're not going to get any better.
Yeah, and I think part of the argument you present here, I mean, I was talking with Dr. John Lott from the Crime Prevention Research Center, and I've been rather frustrated with some of the data that's been coming out, and I'd say in the last decade at least, from the government that kind of cooks the books. It's almost to the point that our government, whenever their hands touch any kind of numbers, it has to fit a narrative. I don't care if it's right or left. I want the facts, the whole facts. I want the truth. And when you start cooking the books and messing around with these numbers and everything else, I mean, what are we handing off to the next generation when the next generation looks back during this period of time? And what they're going to do, somebody's probably going to be smart enough to say any of those numbers that came, I don't care if you're talking about, a pandemic or, whatever, employment numbers, we're just going to put some big asterisks on it so that we know that we're forewarned that this came from a corrupt database.
Yeah, I think what you may be in part referring to is that the FBI's data
that's partly
on where armed civilians were involved in stopping crime included just a small fraction of the total incidents. And there are a number of different databases that include those numbers. The FBI database suffers from a weakness that some large cities don't contribute numbers to the FBI database. For example, Chicago does not.
Right.
Some of the other databases, which are generated using different methodology, actually have more complete numbers. And one of the categories of numbers where the FBI database, assuming for a moment that they're being honest, but where the FBI database is just woefully inadequate, is in the number of incidents where lawfully armed civilians were instrumental in stopping the commission of a crime.
Mm-hmm. You see, but all these numbers, I mean, okay, so you can come up with rationale as to why it's not, but these are government figures. I mean, if you're going to quote them, you better make sure that you can fall on your sword for them and say, okay, these are the right numbers. But there's so many numbers that come, whether it's crime, whether it's jobs that have been created. I mean, come on. At the end of the Biden administration, we get a number that they overestimated employment by 1 million jobs. All of a sudden, 1 million jobs vapor. That to me, Ken, I mean, I came out of the business world that said the number that you project better be pretty darn close, if not right on. You can always do better, but you can't do worse. And and here in it's like when I was growing up, my dad worked in civil service after his service in World War II. And the general mantra was, well, that's close enough for government work.
I remember that saying. The BLS numbers, the harm done was twofold. One, well, the attempted harm was in impacting the election so that Biden could argue that they'd done a great job on employment. Now, fortunately, Biden or Kamala Harris lost, but the margin of Republicans in Congress might be larger, but for those BLS numbers. Even just a few more seats would make a difference.
Ken, we're running out of time, so I'm going to have you summarize this real quick, and then summarize our core American value, free speech, and put a wrap on it here. Okay, I'll give you about 60 seconds. Go ahead.
To quickly finish my point on the BLS, the numbers showing much higher employment were one of the reasons why interest rates weren't cut, and that was bad for the economy and bad for people. So it was just bad overall. Turning to the bigger issue, I believe that America was founded on a premise of the First Amendment: freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom to petition the government. None of that works without free speech. None of that works without recognizing that free speech means, and only means, something if I defend your right to say things with which I strongly disagree. You don't need any rights if I agree with what you say. You need rights when I disagree with what you say.
Exactly.
And the country is moving in a wrong direction, particularly from the left, but even from the right when we turn to Gen Z. We as Americans have to turn this ship around before it's too late.
We're all in this boat together. You're exactly right. This is an us thing. It's not a Republican thing. It's not a Democratic thing. It's a we the people thing, right?
Absolutely. And we, the people, need the right to speak our minds.
Well, Kenin Spivak, I cannot thank you enough. I appreciate the insight as always. And you and I need to have maybe an off-campus conversation about COVID. I'm not sure where we disagree, but we can talk about that later. Kenin is the founder and chairman of the SMI Group, an international consulting firm and a contributor to RealClearPolitics and the Claremont Institute's The American Mind. Kenin, thank you for being with us. Appreciate the time. Take care. Be well, my friend.
Thanks, Bill.
Well, our thanks to Kenin, and thank you for sharing a part of your day with us as we had this conversation about free speech. And the bottom line is, if it's going to get fixed, it's going to be up to me and you. Let's look in the mirror. We, the people, must activate ourselves. Well, that's a wrap for us. Thank you for being with us. May God bless you and keep you. May make his face shine upon you. May be gracious unto you and give you peace. God bless.